Well, hello everyone, and welcome to the Gerontological Society of America's career conversation on building your professional network in gerontology. I'm Dr. Patty Slatum. I'm a visiting scholar with the GSA, and I'm also faculty with the Virginia Center on Aging at VCU, and we'll kick off the beginning of this session today. So thank you all for joining us. Before we begin today's program, I'd like to provide a few logistical considerations. Please keep your audio on mute during the event and submit your questions for the panelists and any resources that you have to share through the Zoom chat. And we invite you to view the event in the Zoom speaker view. And the career conversation is being recorded and will be available after the event on the GSA website. I'm joined today by ESPO member Sarah Dice, newly minted PhD. Congratulations, Sarah, on defending this week from Oregon Health and Science University and Portland State University School of Public Health. And she will serve as moderator for the event. And Dr. Matthew Smith from Texas A&M University will serve as co-moderator and chat monitor. In addition, Claire Pendergrass, another ESPO member from Syracuse University, Dr. Tanya Roberts from the University of Wisconsin-Madison, and Dr. Tiffany Washington from University of Georgia were part of the GSA Mentoring Consultancy's work group that planned the session. And I should mention that Dr. Washington will also be assisting with moderating the chat portion of the session today. So thank you all for that. And I'll just start off with saying that professional networking, we often hear about it. It's touted as something that's essential to our career development and an essential skill. But are there tips for doing this more effectively? This career conversation is offered in advance of our annual scientific meeting to help you make the most of this and other networking opportunities in gerontology. And during this session, we'll discuss strategies to build and sustain your professional network. And we encourage you to ask questions and share your insights through the chat. And I'm going to turn the session over to Dr. Dice.
Excellent. Thank you, Patty, and welcome everyone. We're so excited to have you all here today and thrilled to have the opportunity to hear from today's panelists. So to open, I'm going to introduce our panelists. We're so delighted to have this distinguished group of GSA members with us to share their perspectives on building and sustaining professional networks in our field. So first, we welcome Adichinma Akosianu, who is an MPH and doctoral candidate at the School of Public Health at the University of Minnesota. Next, we welcome Dr. Andrea Gilmore-Bikowski, who is a nurse researcher, assistant professor at the University of Madison, Wisconsin School of Nursing. And finally, we welcome Dr. Patty Slatum, who is a visiting scholar at GSA and professor emeritus at Virginia Commonwealth University and Virginia Center on Aging. So we look forward to an engaging and enlightening conversation. And I will open with our first question. So I'd like to hear from each of you, each of our panelists, on what does having a professional network look like or mean to you?
I can jump in, unless Patty wanted to. I think we're all looking at each other wondering what order to proceed in. I think okay, we'll do. I think that's a really great question. I think that my answer to that is partly that I think that has changed over time. And I think that anticipating and being open to how that might morph at different stages in not just your professional career, but kind of different stages in life, it has something that's been really helpful to me. So things that I might have done 5 or 10 years ago to sustain and kind of cultivate that network might look different now because I am doing different things. I have different abilities and strengths and needs and interests. So, but what does it look like and mean to me? I think that, I guess what it means to me, I could just go on and on about this, but one really big thing is that there are people that I can reach out to without a high threshold of concern about contacting them, people that I am comfortable asking challenging questions, and that there are many different perspectives that I could tap into as I navigate different things. They can be scientific things, they can be things at the interface of one's professional and personal life. We could talk about that line and what that may or may not mean. They could be like unwritten rule type things about how to perceive different information or experiences, how to respond to challenging things. So to me, a network is people I can tap into in the scientific, the collegial, and kind of the unspoken domain of all of the things that happen in scientific endeavors to have frank conversations. And that there's not just one or two people I can go to, but there's a variety of people that I could connect with. That's probably the most important defining criteria for me.
I think I'll add on to that. Very similar take on what having a professional network looks like and means to me. But I'll just continue from where Dr. Bykowski stopped, where for me, it's about having a diversity of people in my professional network. I think that a lot of people discount the power of connecting professionally with your peers. So for instance, I'm a PhD candidate, and at this stage, most of my peers are on the job market. So we're all navigating this experience together, for better or worse, given the pandemic, right? But what that means is that I can now tap into how they've started to think about even collecting or identifying jobs that are of interest to them, right? We can have those conversations. So it's really important to have a diversity of people in your professional network. And so for me, that includes my peers and colleagues and aspirational colleagues. So in thinking about the roles that I want to take on next, I identify people who are already sitting in those roles and discuss with them. A good friend of mine always says, make sure that a few people, at least most people in your circle are smarter than you, right? So it's really important to identify, aspirational colleagues, as well as harnessing the power of your peers as well. And my professional network, when you go pretty much like looking from the top down, is made up of mentors, advisors, and sponsors. So again, alluding to what Dr. Bykowski said, that it's important to understand, how do we pull resources from different areas? You have people who you can vent to, but you also have people who you can say, oh, I want to get in front of this person, or I want to be in this space or in this room, and they help to open those doors. So it's important to also have those sponsors, but also have career and research advisors that can help you really package your ideas and help you sell yourself as well.
So I will add that what you've both said has resonated with me, in that I think of my professional network as a group of people who don't always share the same perspective that I have. They may not be in the same institution I have, or they may, but that we can draw on each other's expertise, knowledge, open doors for each other. I see it as very reciprocal as my professional career has progressed. And what it really means to me at this stage of my career, which is at the later stages, is it's part of what brings joy in work for me. In that these are folks who I truly, my professional network, really enjoy learning from, being around, and those relationships have turned out to be a big part of what I can say have been the things that brought a lot of satisfaction in my career, including the relationships and networking I have with trainees over the years and seeing their careers progress. So for me, it's important for things I want to accomplish in my career, but it's also been part of what brings joy to my career.
Excellent. Thank you all for sharing what your professional networks have looked like over the course of your career, how they've evolved. I think something that I'm interested in and several folks here might be interested in, especially ahead of this annual scientific meeting, our second one in a row that is taking place on a virtual format. You know, I would love to hear your perspectives on networking in the pandemic context, how to do this in a virtual or remote setting. You know, one of the really great benefits of this annual scientific meeting is that face-to-face ability to connect. And, you know, the pandemic has really put a large obstacle in our way of that. So Audie, would you like to take this one on and start?
Sure.
Thank you.
I think before I even directly answer the question, one of the things I want to recognize is that I have different experiences as a Black woman navigating and building a professional network that has to sort of like, that pretty much impacts how I build my professional networks. And so similar to other people of color, I will say that being in a virtual space actually has added a layer of protection for me, in that where I would typically be in a majority white space, and that has implications for how networking can go in person, and the sort of extra hats I have to put on to push through to thrive. I feel safer in a virtual environment, and not to discount the ease of conversation that happens in person, right? So when you connect, there are different nonverbal cues that are sort of missing on the online platform. But for me, it has added a layer of protection in how I can more boldly navigate networking. And so I use one instance as an example. I have an external mentor who's amazing. And, we're talking about me being on a job market. And she was like, oh, there's a new professor in New York that I want you to meet. And it was a quick email. I set up a Zoom meeting and we were able to meet. And so I know in the past, a lot of, especially, those who are scholars in their early stage, sort of hinge on or, hold on to national conferences to do networking. I think that has sort of now opened up a plethora of ways that we can really expand our professional networks in a meaningful way. So I really like Zoom for that aspect. Is like I can have a quick virtual coffee, have a quick 30-minute conversation. It actually, I'm extrovert, introvert some days. So, not awkwardly standing around. It's like, I've made my pitch. I don't know what else to do. How can I exit this conversation? It's like, all right, we schedule a 15-minute quick, check-in. It's done. We can move on. But the conversation resonates with us even after that interaction. And you can always quickly follow up with an email about the online interaction and continue to build on that relationship. So I think that I haven't had to pivot as much, because honestly, even meeting in person is sort of just one piece of that puzzle, right? Because you can't just, it's not like I'm going to meet someone and be like, hey, here's my CV, hire me. It's, oh, introduce myself, maybe have an elevator pitch of my research interest, but it actually, the building part happens post meeting, right? Where you check in with the person, and typically that's even online, regardless of if we were meeting in person or not. A phone call, an email. If part of your professional relationship building is like, I want this person as a long-term mentor, it's checking in about your progress, whether it's, oh, I'm done with my first year of PhD. This is how it went. Here are things I want to improve, because then you're also now introducing your strengths, and you're also creating a space for them to support you and build that relationship. So I think that I haven't really had to pivot as much, but I do recognize the value of those like nonverbal cues and other things that are missing from that in-person connection.
Yes, and thank you, Audie, for acknowledging that, the experience of networking is differential. I really appreciate you raising that point in this conversation and the ways that there are challenges as well as benefits to this pivot to focusing on remote. Dr. Gilmore-Bikofsky, do you have anything to add?
I think I was just like, yes, yes, yes to all of those things. One thought of something that virtual, you know, some of this may be individual in terms of, I feel like this is a place for a lot of self-reflection. That's something that I have, there's always place for that, right? But kind of what is your proclivity towards different types of interactions and why might that be? So I think for me, as someone who networking, you know, when I started doing it, we didn't have we didn't use Zoom, things like that didn't happen. Certainly I would have phone calls with people, but it was like, oh, we can meet at these series of meetings that we all go to. The poor environment with all of us hopping all over the place, right? And now we have new opportunities, but I think that maybe looking also at your, you know, what is your skill set and what are you comfortable with? I know that there are lots of challenges, and I would echo this with the in-person meetings, but I also know that that was how and where I learned to network. So that's something I kind of try to be cognizant of. Something that works really well for me, granted, this is often in situations where I already have a little bit of a relationship, is to just do phone calls. So maybe if you haven't met someone before, those leveraging those nonverbal communication patterns that are so useful to us. But then once you make that social connection, you know, there's something about the kind of the milieu surrounding, like, you know, just like picking up the phone and let's just have a chat, that I feel reduces some of the intensity that I sometimes find uncomfortable with Zoom calls. Perhaps not because they're necessarily intense, but because I am unfamiliar with them. So that's where that reflection, you know, might play a role. I also find for myself that sometimes a lot of the video conferencing type things are just like kind of exhausting. And that could be because I'm a very introverted person, even though at meetings I'm like, let's talk about everything. So maybe thinking about what works for you, because the goal is also to find the mechanism and the medium where you can relax a little bit to, you know, engage at those levels that are not strictly, I don't want to say not strictly collegial, but where you can have some informality, because I do think a part of the nexus of all of this is relationship. You want, you know, concrete advice, you want connections to facilitate, whether it's looking for a job or it might be opportunities that you do not even know about, things that may be coming in 2 or 3 years, but at the nexus of all of that is that you have an actual connection with an actual person. So that's kind of my focus. And I find that I can do that really well in this virtual environment by being like, maybe don't send a Zoom link, just send me your number and we'll just, you know, have a quick talk. So that's one strategy that might work for you, depending upon your comfort level and how much you personally need and rely on the nonverbal cues. So that may also be something that's very individual.
And I just wanted to echo that 100%. Every first virtual connection that I've made has been first a phone call, whether it's someone inviting me to guest lecture or, you know, a quick introductory 15-minute conversation. And then we sort of progress to the Zoom environment, because then it's just more comfortable. It's like, yeah, I don't have to put on this pressure of looking a certain way. I can just really hone in on the connection piece of the conversation.
Yes, and I actually agree. I find it interesting that we all are introverts on some level, and yet we volunteered to do this panel discussion today. And why? Because we do understand how important these networks are. And we, I think, have all adapted in our ways, in our own ways, to the virtual environment that has been put on us by the pandemic. And one thing that I will just add that I tried, and I think it's really been, I've been interested in the response. I've reached out to people, I've reached out to them to see how they're doing with their work during the pandemic. And it's part of maintaining those, those relationships, I think. And I've been so pleasantly surprised at such positive responses that someone reached out to see how their work was doing. And I had my reasons for wanting to know how their research was progressing, what they've been learning, how they've been adapting themselves during the pandemic. But, you know, sometimes as introverts do have to just take a step out and reach. And I focused on my early career colleagues who were, I mean, you know, maybe they're at a new institution and then a pandemic hits and they're having a hard time maybe developing their network within their institution even. It was a perfect opportunity to just connect, talk about strategies, and just have a check-in. So I tried to use it that way. That doesn't necessarily work for starting new relationships. And that's where I have found the most challenge during this time. You know, I follow up maybe with email or a call after seeing a presentation online. I have found that to work to some degree of making connection with people when they've given a presentation. And it's been another Zoom meeting and it just, you know, maybe a few days later to reach out and say, hey, this part of what you were working on really, I'd love to learn more. And some of those can result into the kinds of things that you're suggesting. I've often started those by email rather than a phone call, but I like the idea of the phone call too.
That's actually a wonderful segue, Dr. Sladom, and I'm glad you raised that point. You know, reaching out and beginning networks is one piece of a professional network. I'd love to hear your thoughts and your experiences about what it's like or what it has been like for each of you sustaining the networks that you do have, because it is relational. It is more than just a, hey, I have a favor to ask, or hey, this is interesting. How do you know, breathe life into these relationships over time?
That's a really good question.
Oh, you go ahead, Andrea, please.
I just was going to clarify. So is the question about sustainability of relationships over time, or is it more about kind of the quality of the individual relationships in the network, or maybe it's both?
I think it's a little bit of both. When I say sustain, I mean, how do your relationships last? I mean, different relationships within your network might serve different purposes. You're not going to be lifelong best friends with every single person in your professional network.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm interested in hearing what that might look like for each of you. So speaking to quality, or even, you know, do you have systems or strategies in place where you do, you know, keep in touch with folks that might be external to your workplace, for example?
Okay. So I'll have a go at that. I think it's a really good question. I have a couple of strategies I use, but I think that the highest quality relationships are ones that you naturally invest in, and ones where there's a natural reciprocation of investment, not the ones that I'm artificially monitoring. There's kind of something about those. I don't know what it is, but I have a couple of like rules of engagement that I use across the board. And they're not, the goal isn't necessarily sustainability. It's just kind of how I think about things for myself. One is that the world is really small. And this may depend upon where you are, but I just kind of have a rule of, I know how I want to conduct myself. I know about the level of integrity that I feel I need to have. I know how I feel I need to leave interactions with other people, even when, you know, they won't all be positive, right? But I know about what my side of the equation needs to be, and I'm going to consistently uphold that. So that's kind of one rule of engagement I have, right? That I'm putting out things that I would be proud of in whatever universe network, you know, that there is. And then a second kind of rule of engagement is I try to work with people that I like working with. And we may not have natural intersections. I have some colleagues from, I mean, like a decade ago, and we're just like, oh, let's now write this other grant on this thing. And because we love working together. I really believe that the quality of my science, you know, to some extent, there's something about who is putting what into it that comes out on the back end, right? So that's kind of a second rule of engagement, I suppose, that I use. And then in terms of like processes to sustain or cultivate, I actually just, this is very simple, but I have a Post-it and I call it follow-up. And people that I think I need to follow up with, like, it'll just occur to me like, oh, I should send so-and-so this paper because it relates to something we talked about at a meeting, you know, or someone that I just haven't connected with in a year. And it's like, I should just find a reason to follow up, right? And kind of one reason that I do that is when I think about a network or relationships, they help sustain you. I really agree with what was said about this being a very gratifying part of work, but also I think that more than I expected, I found that you encounter times where you need supports that you didn't think you needed. And so they have provided that for me. But more than that, what I've learned, and this is my like put out things that I can be proud of, is the return on investment often results from a process you never know about. So a lot of opportunities, a lot of really wonderful things that have happened to me professionally happened in rooms. I have no idea who was there. I have no idea what they were talking about, but it yields this great opportunity for me. And that's the result of a network. You know, that's the result of places that you were and people that you've spoken to, whether or not like I had a Zoom call with them, right? So I guess that's a part of why I do that follow-up, because I want to make sure that I'm, you know, that I'm positioning, my goal is to position myself to have influence to advance the health of, you know, the populations that I hope I'm serving. So a network to me is kind of like central to that. So that's why I do my Post-it thing. I feel like that's a little excessive though. So you'd have to check if that feels like, you know, I always feel like I'm kind of stalking people. And there's not usually a lot of names. There's like 3 or 4 people where it's like, you know, I want to follow up about the study they were doing or the symposium they had, just in a strategic sense that I want those people to know that I'm interested in the work that they're doing.
I think that is exactly on the mark of making sure that these relationships are as natural as possible. I think we've overused the word authentic. So I really like the use of or saying natural, because I think with anything in life, it's not like you can say, you know, clearly and linearly map out like this is how my relationship is going to go. So you have to sort of leave room for flow, right? You have to sort of leave room for things, you know, being open to new experiences. So you're going in with a level of risk, understanding that I may not get what I think, you know, I've written that I will, but better things can come out of this. And even when I say thinking about like, what is it that I'm interested in pursuing next after my PhD, I sort of had an idea of what it would be, but it wasn't in talking with an external mentor that I was able to like hone in on, you know, what that could look like specifically, and start to generate ideas of who I should talk to next to sort of have information or interviews to either validate that, yes, this is what I'm really interested in, or, oh, maybe it's a little slightly different route that I'm willing to take. And so I think, you know, it's really important to just open yourself to having conversations and not be too stuck on like a specific short-term goal. Because sometimes you're like, okay, I want to get this job, so I'm going to meet this person to get this job. But then you could get the job and it could work out fantastic, but that may not lead to sustainability, because if the focus is just like, I wanted to use this person or to connect with this person to get a job, you know, what happens after you get a job? Because there's still growth that needs to happen, right? You're not perfect now that you've landed a job. So you want to make sure that we want to make sure that we are strategic in the how of you know, why we're connecting, and you know, thinking more long term about how we may want to continue to build that connection over time. And maybe it, you know, also being honest that, you know what, I really just want this person to review my CV, and that's literally it. But making sure that you have the categories and understanding what how you want those connections to thrive, or how you want those connections to grow over time, is really, really important. And that comes back to like making sure that your conversations are as natural, as Dr. Bukowski said, as possible, because then, you know, doors that you didn't even think about just open for you. And it's very interesting how it happens. You're like, oh my God, I didn't even think about this, but here I am doing this role that I never thought about. But because I had, you know, honest, open conversations with people in my network, I was able to get to that point. So I think that's a really, really important piece of the puzzle.
Yeah, I would actually, I really agree with that. I think entering these relationships with that level of just honesty, I don't think networking works when you just go after people you need something from, right? I mean, there needs to be this reciprocal nature to have a relationship. So we think about how, you know, do we go about building those? And if I really need to talk to this person about a job, then that's what I need to say, not something else trying to get them to do something I want them to do, right? And that's how I think relationships can build over time, is just starting with that honesty. And then I think some relationships are going to sustain more easily than others. And maybe some of them don't need to or shouldn't, right? And I can think about over my professional time that not every relationship that I invested in turned out to be a good thing for me. In that, you know, not every research collaboration turns out to be something that's productive. And I try to take the approach of, when I enter into the relationship, one, being honest, but two, delivering on what I say I'm going to do. If I find a good way to build relationships is to actually do something and work together, right? And if I'm going to do that, then it needs to be real, and I need to deliver on what I said I was going to do. And when those things fall apart, we don't build strong relationships over time. But I really think we have to acknowledge that not every attempt in our professional relationship building is going to turn out to be constructive, and that it's okay to allow some of them to naturally dissolve, right? Otherwise, the network would keep growing across our whole career and be impossible to maintain. And I think we need different things at different times of our career, and we can give different things at different times of our careers. So there is some natural evolution to all of it.
Completely agree, especially on the collaboration and giving as much as you're wanting to receive. I think that at every stage of your career, there is something that you can contribute. So I talk in examples, so forgive me if it's too much, but I think that's sometimes the best way for me to communicate my ideas. My mentor approached me about a job opportunity. It wasn't a great fit for me, but I identified a candidate that she might be interested in, and I made the introduction. So it is a two-way street. And now they're having conversations, and this candidate might end up getting like a high possibility of getting the job. So I've helped my mentor fulfill a need and added value to our relationship, or contributed value to our relationship, not just, you know, her looking out for me or looking for a job for me. So there are different ways to be collaborative in your professional, within your professional networks, whether it's, you know, working on a research together, but helping each other look for jobs. You know, I share jobs with my peers share jobs with me, but that's because we've built that relationship. Like they deeply understand what I'm interested in, and I communicate that to them, not assuming that, oh, they know what's going on in my head. And so that power of communication can also take us very far in identifying relationships that need to die, but also relationships that have the potential to thrive.
Definitely spot on all points. And Audie, you've started kind of answering my next question. I'm going to ask Dr. Sladem and Dr. Gilmore-Bikowski to lean into the discomfort a little bit of the introvertedness and sort of pump yourselves up and talk a little bit about, you've both mentioned in certain ways how your network has resulted in working relationships, products. What other types of contributions have you made to your personal professional networks?
Well, it's a good question to think about, right? So if I think back on my own professional networks, what are some of the kinds of things that I've attempted to contribute to them? I mean, I think one is always our expertise that we have in our field, and also our own ability to connect people with others. So I look at, when I think about, say, my mentees or people I might have met at a conference that I think might be interested in the work of someone else, right? So I've contributed, I think, in making connections for people. I think I've contributed my expertise to the discussion about our common work. I hope I've contributed some perspective sometimes, especially as you get more experienced in your career, the things that have worked or haven't, particularly within an institution or within an organization, that you can offer doorways or pathways that others can begin a journey down, are certainly contributions to relationships. I think mostly actually access to your own network is one of the biggest things that you can do to contribute to someone else's network. But I'd be interested to hear from our other panelists on that.
Well, I think it's a great question. A couple of other thoughts came up after listening to some of the last things Audie said that I want to see if I'm capable of linking to ways that we contribute. One, as I was talking about kind of like rules of engagement or principles, something that I think is really important, because I loved what was shared about, within your network of peers, you're sharing with one another job opportunities, and it sounds like there's a level of transparency, and something that I have found really challenging to maintain as I progress in my career is this kind of commitment to non-competition. I do not compete with people. I really believe there's room for everyone. There's space for everyone. Everyone has room to contribute. And something that I try to identify and weed out is people that some of this is like, you have a sentiment, right? That people might feel that maybe there's intimidation, maybe there's discomfort. You're not sure what it is, but I do not engage in competition. So whether I know you personally, we have a personal relationship, I'm here to build other people up. I'm here to see everybody succeed. I just think that that's what science needs. And that's what we all deserve as people, trying to do really, really hard jobs. It's just the bare minimum that we can provide one another. So I think that that's something that has some ricochets in terms of things that I'm able to contribute. It's maybe not necessarily just the substance of what you offer, but the manner in which it's offered, the manner in which you support someone else in their scholarship. I like to think of myself, this is probably also one of my biggest limitations, as like a real contributor. So, when I'm on a project as a co-I or as a co-author, I'm really, my question is, what can I contribute, and have I contributed? And I think that that's a reason that I have sustained collaborations. I think people might come back to me and invite me, I'm working on this paper, I'm stuck on this thing, and I know that in the past you've really contributed and looked at the ideas, and that's been really helpful. So, that's something that I try to be consistent in. Or, as I think was mentioned, and I can't recall by whom, being honest about what you can and can't do. Like, I can probably look at this portion, of the analysis for this aim. I probably I don't have bandwidth to do anything else with very high quality. So that then your other collaborator or person in your network is, knows what you're entering into. So I think a big thing, it was also mentioned, your disciplinary expertise. My clinical background is in nursing, and I do take to heart many discipline specific principles that I hope are useful in other projects, the way we talk about people, the way we think about people, the way we understand circumstance. And I try to be pretty obnoxious about it. So people that don't like that, won't invite me back, right? Because that's a part of the package. And I think a part of that, another thing I wanted to mention is, we can all only work so hard to not be ourselves. And I think that that's something that I'm always working on. And I think a lot of us have to always be working on, but the more I am who I really am, as a scientist, and as a person, the more I find, people say, find your people, the more I get with this group of people when I'm oh, I'm not too much for you. This isn't too annoying for you. That I'm going to be also, we cannot talk about people like they're not people. It's just not going to happen if you're working with me. So people that are I want you for that. So I think that those are things that I contribute, but also that they're, again, this concept of reciprocation and reverberation, that brings back other, it's that there's a return for me based on what I'm putting in. And if I put in artificial things, I'm going to get things back I don't want. So that's something that I have learned, and try to not give.
Oh, I wasn't sure if that question was also for me, but I wanted them. I was too engaged listening to their response and taking it in. But
If you have anything else that you'd like to add, we'd love to hear it.
oh, I think they've said it all. Definitely said it all. Thank
Excellent.
you.
I do want to I'm just keeping an eye on the clock here. Dr. Washington, Dr. Smith, have you seen anything in the chat from our audience that we'd like to raise up to the fore?
We do have one question that's been posed, and that question is how to build networks that can facilitate your job seeking process.
So I actually think that's a great question because in our early careers, but also throughout our career, right? When we're looking to make a change, we rely on networks, and early career thinking about how do you make those networks. And again, I think that sort of being upfront and honest about where you are is part of that. And let's say at an annual scientific meeting, like we have coming up soon, even though it's virtual, connecting with people that have interest or are working in the field you aspire to do, or the kind of job you aspire to do, so that one, you can learn from them, but two, you can also hear more about what kinds of opportunities might be there. And just like we heard earlier, sometimes it's working with others who can help connect you to someone who's looking for a job, right? Or looking to hire someone for a job. And so I think what I have not, when I've been trying to hire someone, one thing I have not found too appealing is when someone contacts me and they're not upfront about why they're contacting me. And it takes me a little time to figure that out. And then I'm not really sure why they're volunteering to do XYZ when what they really wanted was A. So, but if they tell me they're looking about A, I feel almost like I want to connect with them, talk about what I have, why, and what other things might be available. So you can take advantage of other people's networks too in that way. And I'm curious what others of you have felt like. I occasionally get contacted through electronic media, or social media, like LinkedIn, for people looking about employment. I have, and what I really want to know is that's why they're contacting me to start off. so that it gets right to the heart of the matter. And I'm curious whether other people find that to be true or not in this circumstance.
I would agree. I think it's a really good question. I think that there are multiple ways to think about it, maybe abstractly and then practically. I think a part of the abstract way of thinking about this is all of those things we talked about, that it's easier to connect people to opportunities when you know them as a person. So again, I want us to understand the concept of extraction and how it is fundamentally in opposition with things that we need to build professional networks. We cannot be trying to extract things from other people without a, foundation of transparency and I suppose transparency and I guess I want to say like honesty about what we need. It's perfectly fine to be on the job market, and I think that I think social media is really helpful to people. I think I see a lot of people that are on the job market putting together personal websites and getting those things out there, because then people feel like they know you and they may or may not really know you, right? And there's some familiarity. There's nothing wrong with being on the job market, and I feel there's this implicit like embarrassment around it. Everyone at one point in their lives was on the job market, or on a market for some new opportunity, and just saying, I'm looking for faculty positions. I'm really interested in this. And I just want to remind everyone, like, you don't want any job that doesn't want you. Any job that's really hard to get in the door, hard to have a conversation, hard to get an answer on if you would be, a fit for this post they have, and they're not, like, you don't want any of that. This is my bias. So I think that, I think it's really important to just say, this is who I am. This is my background. I'm looking forward to, and a big thing for me is when we're looking for jobs and opportunities, we're also often thinking about ourselves and like what we want, but we can frame that in ways where there's always, a broader benefit of you fulfilling what you want in this environment. So I'm looking for ways to contribute to blah, 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 that's aligned with your personal mission. So I would say also like vet those emails past people that are trusted colleagues to help with that process, because it's really not something we learn. But I hope some of that's helpful, and just know that it's being on the job market is a good thing. There's nothing wrong with it. It's not like, I feel like people feel like they're on the job market, so they're like somehow some throwaway or something. Like it's totally normal it's a thing. There's nothing wrong with it. Send those emails, but yes, be absolutely clear about why you're sending them.
Yes, I absolutely want to hear from people who are interested in the kind of work that we're doing. I would say, sometimes they're hard to find. So I do appreciate when people reach out. And I think it's a role for mentors to play too. When our mentees are in the job market, offering to do those email checks and reviews and connecting with people who might be able to further it. I mean, I've had trainees who wanted to go in a little different direction than my own career. Here, we all sit in academia primarily. What about those ones who aren't looking for academic jobs and it's not necessarily our tight network? We can figure out how to help them too. So I say, turn to your mentors and let them know what you need, because sometimes that can help get you there too.
I completely agree. I was just about to say that too, this is when you activate, people who have the pleasure of being, known as your mentors or your advisors in your programs. It comes with a responsibility in supporting you through this transition period. So lean on them to help activate those connections around job seeking. I think that it's really important to be direct about what you're looking for, especially if you're not a first-year student who is truly looking to build the CV with the research experience and things like that. You're trying to actively get into a role, a job position. And so just say that, like, when you reach out directly or through your mentors, you can ask your mentor, like, hey, I've identified Dr. XYZ. I know you guys presented at GSA together this one year. I'm interested in this job that she is the contact person for, he's the contact person for. I would like you to do XYZ, or I would like you to review an email that I'm about to send to them to make sure that it has XYZ things. So really be direct in the ask of your mentors, and when you do reach out directly, so that people are very clear about what you want from them, whether it's your mentors or if it's the people that you're reaching out directly to ask for, to be considered for a job opportunity. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that, like Dr. Slater and Dr. Bikowski has said. People are looking, like my external mentor is actively looking for someone to fulfill, to fill up this position. She has a billion other things she's doing. So any extra help with identifying great candidates, people will jump on it. So I think if you use that mindset in approaching job seeking, it helps to increase your confidence in asking without shame of whatever else that society has conditioned us to feel about these things.
Thank you very much. We have another question in the chat, and it relates to reaching out to a potential mentor or collaborator for expertise or advice, or working on a manuscript with whom there is not an existing natural connection. How would you recommend going about connecting with that person?
So I'll address this because I do this all the time. And it's not something I always did, but I just kind of like, I guess my modus operandi is like, I'm here to like do good scholarship in science. Like, I'm here to be in the playground with other people. Someone has expertise or some type of parallel, knowledge that they can contribute. And oftentimes the longer that you're in the game, so to speak, you may not know someone, but you will have seen or met them, right? And this goes to like GSA is coming up, participate in GSA, go to sessions. If there's, I don't know all the details of what it's going to be like, but if you can put your camera on, put your camera on in those sessions. That's how you may not know people, but people very well may know you. If you do those things, especially over a couple of years. But I also wanted to mention, I use this as a strategy as well to facilitate productivity. So I know it was mentioned that, actually working around a product is a great way to build relationships, but it also helps me, like, I guess it's just a hard stop for me. And I'm like, I'm working on this paper. It's going to be about this. Here's an abstract. Curious if you might, be open to contributing as a co-author. We could set up a short call to review. And you want to discuss expectations, discuss what you're looking for, discuss your time frame, and they can make a decision. They may decline. People decline my offers, and it's like, that's okay. And it doesn't actually ever stop me from asking. Like, I will come back and ask them again. And then, that other time they may have less things going on. They might be like, this is great. I really wanted to work with you. I'm sorry I couldn't last time. So I just want to also, if cold calls don't go well, it doesn't mean necessarily that that person doesn't want to work with you. Maybe their circumstance, or maybe they were on leave, or they had things going on. But another thing you can do is ask people in your network if they know someone. So I call this vetting people, which is a silly thing to have to do, but not everyone is nice. Or maybe nice isn't the right word. Maybe the right word is kind. And, you might say, I was thinking of reaching out to this person, and people might say, I don't know that I would recommend that. It hasn't happened to me very often. And I might do this when I'm thinking of reaching out to someone who's particularly senior, maybe leads a particularly large team. And I just have no pulse on, like, are they approachable? Are they not approachable? And people might be like, they're amazing. They're so busy, like, give it a try. Right. But that's something I've done to just protect myself for those rare circumstances. 98% of the time, people are really excited to collaborate. They're really excited to hear from you, even if they don't have capacity. So I just want to encourage people to, if you feel like you can do this, if nothing else, you have a conversation and you set it up where you say, I really value these things about your work. This is the goal for this particular paper. I wonder if you could contribute X. This would be my timeline. You know, I really appreciate you connecting with me. I know that we haven't met before, but it still is great to connect around this. If this doesn't work, maybe there will be something else in the future, you know, and set up that next step for someone in case it's not a fit. But anyways, I just want to plug that because so many products and things I've worked on have been someone, you know, cold messages me like, here's a draft of the paper. We saw you give this talk. We, you know, wonder if you could contribute this, or I'm doing it to other people. And like I said, I'll do it serially. So like, if you're a scholar and I think your work is just dope and I'm like, appreciate the precision of your science, like I'm basically after you to see when we can work together. So, so give it a go.
Thank you so much. And what a beautiful, inspiring note to sort of end our conversation today. I want to thank our panelists for making time for us today to have this conversation, and all of you out in the audience for being here and being a part of it. To bring our session to a close today, we've asked each of our panelists to share a pearl of wisdom about professional networking and gerontology with all of us. So we'll start with Adia Kosianu. What is your pearl?
Thank you again for having me on this fantastic panel. I've learned so much, and you know, as in the networking spirit, I'm like, yep, I definitely need to reach out to Dr. Biskowski and Dr. Sladom to connect. So I think that everyone, including myself, has taken something from this. So thank you. My pearl of wisdom would be that effective networking is truly about relationship building. The focus should be on building mutually beneficial professional relationships that are natural. I changed that from authentic, but natural and intentional. So prioritize self-care and ensure that you're in a safe, supportive spaces where you can thrive. Lastly, you need to ask yourself this question: what is my why? Once you have this clearly figured out, you'll be well positioned to implement strategies for success. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Adi. And next, Dr. Gilmore Bukowski.
Okay, so I did write up a pearl earlier. I'm just going to share the beginning of it and then one other related thing as we're talking about connecting. And I guess one thing I want to share that maybe is a pearl of insight is I've never, if someone has reached out to me or emailed me about questions, connections, I've never not met with someone ever in my whole life. And I think that I'm like a lot of people. So I just wanted to share that in case that offers people some, you know, comfort in the networking that you endeavor to embark on. My pearl is to connect with people who share your values. I think that connecting on values and principles is a very good foundation for all of those things that Adi mentioned in terms of safety and security and real natural connections.
Excellent. Thank you, Dr. Gilmore Bukowski. And finally, Dr. Sladom, your pearl. You're muted. It had to happen once.
Yes, right at the end. Okay, here we are. So authentic, natural, real, our word that we might choose today, but I think we all know what we're getting at, is that it is reciprocal and natural professional relationships. They truly are at the heart of our professional growth and worth investing in. And our efforts to build this rich and diverse network, they do pay off. So introverts, get out there. And remember, I think about this at my stage of career particularly, but being generous with our support of the development of others. So that particularly for our early career colleagues, by introducing them to our networks and incorporating them in our networks, we can also sustain our field. So just remembering generosity in all of this.
Excellent. Please join me in thanking our panelists for generously sharing our time, their time today, all of our time today, and their career experiences and perspectives with us. And thanks to the work group that puts on these career conversations. We are so grateful and looking, speaking of opportunities to connect, if these conversations, types of intersections are of interest to you, we would love to collaborate and hear what you're interested in bringing to the broader GSA base. And a big thank you to Gina Schoen from the GSA staff for all of her behind the scenes coordination that made today's conversation possible. We so appreciate you and couldn't do it without you. We'll be sending a brief survey out following this event for you to provide feedback and help us in planning future career conversations. Before I officially close it, Dr. Slatum, am I missing anything on our announcements?
The only thing I might add is that please remember to take advantage of these professional networking opportunities that are going to happen at our virtual meeting, because there are a number of them within sections, within the opportunities where posters and presentations are given. And I think there's going to be some unique ones that involve pets this year. So you might check that out and plan ahead so that you can take full advantage of the things in front of you. And you can see those opportunities are listed on the website for GSA for the meeting, but also on your meeting app. And yeah, use that tool to make those connections and get them started.
Yes, and I think new this year, you'll see it once the meeting starts. There will be virtual spaces to connect with folks. So if you do find a symposium presenter that's really interesting, want to connect with a new colleague, there will be intentional spaces set up for your use put on by GSA. So have a look out for that as well. Once the meeting starts next week, we hope to see you all there.
Thank you, Sarah.
Excellent.
Thank you, panelists. It was really fun doing this with you.
Yes, thank you all.